Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and your podcast co-host. This week we present a special episode of Next Round with the 4th of July holiday just around the corner. Our guest is Chef Andrew Gruel. Now, you may know Andrew as the founder of the Slapfish Restaurant Group. He's currently the CEO and founder of the American Gravy Restaurant Group, which has restaurants like Calico Fish House and Big Parm Pizza and Two Birds Chicken and Butterleaf and many others. You've seen him in his appearances on the Food Network and on Fox News and his own YouTube channel under the American Gravy banner. And he has a terrific Substack where he shares his thoughts on food and policy and other matters. And he's now a policymaker himself as a newly appointed member of the Huntington Beach City Council. We sat down with Andrew a few weeks ago at FreedomFest in Palm Springs, and we get his thoughts on many of the policy issues that are affecting restaurants and small business owners across the state, including the push for the higher minimum wage and all of the lingering restrictions from the COVID era. But then we also talk about food, of course. He has a terrific family cookbook that he recently released called Andrew Gruel's Family Cookbook, and we get some insight on why he decided to write this book and the importance of cooking with your family. So after the break, please sit back and listen to our terrific interview with Chef Andrew Gruel. Hope you enjoy it. We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. Andrew, it's great to have you here on Next Round here at FreedomFest.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So we're thrilled to get to talk about your terrific book, your Family Cookbook, which actually I can't wait to start making some recipes from in here because it's pretty good stuff and people can get that at their favorite bookseller. But I think before we talk about that, it's a lot of policy issues that are in your world, not just in your new job, but in your world as a chef and running restaurants. So, you gained national prominence, of course, during COVID-19 for your being the bright light, calling out, the plight of restaurant owners who were struggling in California to stay in business due to the government shutdowns. So 5 years later, from your perspective, have restaurants truly recovered in California from what they went through in that 2020-21 period? And are there challenges that are continuing to plague restaurant owners? And, really, what are the lessons learned from that time that policymakers should apply for when we're thinking about pandemics and health policy as it relates to restaurants?
After 5 years, I would say that restaurants have not completely recovered. There's certain levels to the recovery. One area that I think that things have been forgotten about is really the restaurants, and not even just the restaurants, but it's the restaurants, the hairdressers, all the small businesses that were lost in that initial first 4 to 6 weeks that never even got to take advantage of the PPP or the Employee Retention Credit Program. Those businesses, many of those people are still crawling out of personal bankruptcy. They've been completely forgotten about. I talk to a lot of those people, and that's kind of a sad reality of what's happened with COVID. The second piece in regards to the general recovery during COVID, especially in California, although I would suggest that across the nation, we saw the government take on levels of power that we knew existed, but they were very creative with that power in terms of getting involved in our every move, our every action in the business world. And that really almost set a new baseline. And I look at it as it reconditioned business owners to almost operate within that framework of the government's going to basically co-business with me. And that's not gone away. The third piece of it, of course, is the economic element, that what we saw after COVID, and it's always the, kind of the sugar and the spice. So here's all this money, like, we're going to give you PPP, forgivable loans, in addition to what everybody was getting as an individual. We're just going to throw out all this money at you. But then we're also simultaneously, and not immediately, but we knew, any of us who have a lick of common sense in regards to economics know that there's always going to be an opposite reaction, and that was the inflation, the supply chain issues, the costs of everything going up, and then them peppering in, going back to my first or second point, peppering in all of the new labor regulations, which drive the cost of labor up significantly, and we're still facing all of those hurdles. So I would suggest that from 2020 to today, running a restaurant, especially in California, is probably 40 to 50% harder, not just in regards to the economic environment, but also the regulatory environment.
During the pandemic, despite all the shutdown orders and the heavy-handed government, there were actually some innovative ideas that we saw to help restaurateurs, like allowing more al fresco dining. Even Sacramento, they would take up a lane of traffic where you could put all the tables and chairs and stuff. And I love allowing the sale of the to-go cocktails to take home when you did the take-home orders. But a lot of those changes, unfortunately, were temporary. But they really sound like good ideas that should be permanent changes. So what are your thoughts on that and your experience with those kind of changes at the time?
Well, generally speaking, anytime there's an emergency and you watch the government roll back the regulations to try and fix the problem, as we saw with the fire as well recently in Los Angeles, where Newsom said, we're going to, roll back the permitting process and we're going to accelerate X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, why can't you do that all the time? You know that's the spark that's going to add efficiency to this process and get us out of this emergency quicker. Well, we're living in an emergency pretty much at all times in California. So they know that it's not, the case that they make for not doing those things is either public safety, it's dangerous. Those are always the cases, but then we did it and we saw that wasn't the case, so therefore shouldn't that cancel out the original program? So yes, I agree, there were some good things that came out of that. I would suggest the alfresco dining, that was an interesting one. That one I would go back and forth on, especially now that I understand city council and city ordinances and kind of the planning process, which I still think, even in a conservative city, can be a little bit cumbersome, and there's some cronyism there. However, because there were less people out, obviously there was more access to curbs and streets, and that was a good thing. But I would suggest, for example, in regards to the alfresco dining, that perhaps they just allow the permitting process to be a little bit smoother. We might not need to be spilling out on the streets, because those have now, in California, become, and they did quickly, they really became kind of homeless hangouts.
So, California continues to see all these destructive minimum wage policies enacted at both the state level and the local level. There's been a lot of debate recently about this $30 hotel minimum wage in Los Angeles. Really, when you add the healthcare stipend, it's $38.85. And then that's on top of, we've had the $20 restaurant minimum wage. So from your vantage point, how do policies like this affect your operations, your ability to hire and retain and pay your valued employees and expand your business? And what's your message to policymakers when they're thinking about further minimum wage increases like this in the future?
They never work. Minimum wage mandates and having the government manipulate the rate of pay in the workforce always has an opposite reaction, and it hurts the worker. Hands down, period. We are a very, very pro-worker business. And I always look at what's going to happen when things like that are put in place. So, well, what's interesting also about the one in regards to the hospitals is that Newsom kicked that can down the road multiple times because they couldn't afford it. So as the king, he has the power to say, oh, you know what, this is a bad economic decision, so we're going to move it forward. But by virtue of his virtue, he then realizes, okay, I got to put it in place at some point, or else I'm going to get called out by the commie wing of my party. It's very, very simple. You're going to pay your team members what you can afford to pay your team members. If you are a bad business, those team members are going to leave, and they're going to go work for someplace that is a good business and treats their workers well. I like that because we pride ourselves on paying our workers very, very well. The minimum wage stuff doesn't affect me directly because I'm not even close to the minimum wage. I don't have any employees that are near the minimum wage in the back of the house. However, we like to hold ourselves to a standard that's a certain percentage above that baseline minimum wage. So even for me, where I'm starting my kitchen guys off at $25 to $30 an hour, which is well above the 20 mandate, at least in the recent AB 1228. I will now go 30 to 35 if it goes to 20 because I want to be that percentage above it. Right? Mm-hmm. They were happy. They were working hard. They were aggressive. The businesses that now have to have to increase their cost to hit that minimum wage mandate, they're going to lay off employees, or they do. It's 100% fact. They lay off employees or they cut hours. And the reason that's important is that in many cases you have employees that you make, especially in the restaurant industry, you have relationships with where they say, hey, I want overtime, right? So you calculate their labor and you say, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to pay you, you're going to work 60 hours a week. I calculate that in at your 40 minimum, or your 40 regular, your 20 overtime, etc. When the minimum wage goes up and in that overtime doubles essentially and scales up even harder, and your payroll taxes go up, you go to that employee and say, hey, I got to bring you back down to 30. You're going to have to go get another job. So now they've got to go out and try and find another job. So on paper, it doesn't look like you lost employees, but you did. You actually brought in more employees, or you're trying to, which then you can't go get. And that was what happened in the original, when they passed AB 1228, and Newsom said, look, there's more jobs out there, and it's not true. It was like a split stock, right? And it was the same dividend split twice. And then ultimately those numbers did go down, as I projected that they would, because businesses needed to find more efficiencies. They co-pack, they outsource a lot of their production, and that goes in many cases either overseas or to larger corporations, and the workers lose out and prices also go up. Never work. It never has worked, and it never will work when the government gets involved in wage.
My brother's a restaurant general manager in Virginia, and he says his biggest thing, and he has to deal with all these issues, his biggest thing is retaining workers and finding enough people. And when he doesn't, he gets to do 4 jobs that night to make sure everything happens.
Of course. Well, that's what's hard in the restaurant industry, is that we're also in a world where when you start talking about, $20 an hour mandated minimum wage at McDonald's or any of these places, you're gonna have workers that hop around a lot more because they think they're gonna be able to get more money. The government is creating an illusion, and it's a false promise, right? Oh, it's a great economy, you're gonna make all this money because we're increasing minimum wage. What they don't realize is that all those businesses in the community in which these workers live, they're also increasing their prices, because who's eating that cost? The consumer. Right. Like, that is the most basic economic principle. It's all passed through. So I don't understand where they think that it's gonna help the economy. It's as if all these lawmakers have never even read an Econ 101 book.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
There's been a lot of discussion at the state level and in Washington about this no tax on tips policy, and both presidential candidates talked about it. Last year, one was kind of playing catch up on the issue, and it's certainly in the big debate in the one big beautiful bill going on now. What are your thoughts on this and how it would impact your workers? And there's this general discussion, right, of restaurants having a tipping policy and whether that's a good idea at all. Where do you come down on that debate?
Oh boy, we could go on about the tipping conversation for hours. I'll say this. First, one thing I do find very hilarious is that Kamala Harris went out and was campaigning and platforming on this idea of no tax on tips, and all of her comrades in California, especially those in the state legislature, were echoing her sentiments, and it just failed in California, so they all voted against it. So that's hilarious. Campaign promises not kept. Then, in regards to the tax on tips, first of all, nobody was clear on either side about the details. Was it no tax for the workers, or was it no payroll tax as well, right? And the answer is it's not no payroll tax as well. The businesses are the ones that get hit the hardest. I think just generally speaking, I'm fine with any time I hear no taxes, I'm good with that. I don't like picking certain industries. I think that there should be an equal application across the board. But I'm always going to support when they say no tax on any, right? That's just my baseline. However, we got to understand, in California, where there's a mandatory, at least now in my area, $18 an hour minimum wage, we're not a tip credit, right? So we don't make $3, $4, $5 an hour plus tips to mete out minimum wage. In places like New Jersey or Florida, they might make a mandatory mandatory minimum that's below the minimum, right? So it might be like $3.25, but then when you add the tips back, it just has to be above minimum wage. If it's not above minimum wage, then the business has to subsidize that. In California, it's $18 an hour, and on top of that, they're making $50 to $60 an hour in tips. So most of my front of the house workers are walking with upwards of $70 to $80 an hour. There's this idea that restaurant workers, especially front of the house, are poor college kids that are eating ramen. They're not. Restaurant workers front of the house make a lot of money in tip jobs. So that's important to mention. It's the business that needs to lose the taxes on the tips that are outrageous, because when that server makes $70 an hour on tips, I'm paying $70 an hour on payroll tax. People don't realize that the business pays the payroll tax, well, 50%, right? And then the employee pays on that. That needs to go away. So that would kill us. If they want no tax on tips for my team members, of course I'm going to support that. That's more money in their pockets. Tipping as a general institution across the United States certainly has its issues. However, it's never going to go away. It is never going to go away. Every single restaurant, large and small, especially major restaurant brands like Danny Meyer's, Union Square Hospitality, they've tried doing the, hey, we're going to pay you all $35 an hour and we're going to eliminate tipping. It never works, because they'll go to another restaurant where they can make more. When we opened our most recent restaurant, which is a full-service, it's not finer dining, but a full-service bar restaurant, I sat down my entire team and I said, hey, I'll pay you guys between $35 and $40 an hour flat, no tips in the whole restaurant. All of them said they'll walk. Every one of them. They don't want that. They can make more money getting tips, so they will never stay in a restaurant that they make that mandatory amount. In addition to the fact that those who are the hardest workers, they want the incentive. The incentive structure worked, and that's why, in my opinion, we've got the best service in America versus Europe, where they have no tipping.
So if you look kind of across the landscape at the high-profile celebrity restaurateurs and the celebrity chefs, a lot are very outspokenly left-leaning in their politics, and they engage in a lot of high-profile activism for the causes they support, and obviously you have a little different political outlook than them. So what has been your experience interacting with some of these very left-leaning culinary stars, and what's the impact been on your professional opportunities with that? Or have you had any uncomfortable encounters because of your outspokenness on the other side of the aisle?
Certainly. There's a lot of chefs out there that don't like me. They don't know why they don't like me, but they don't like me just because I'm on Fox News or any of the more conservative-leaning outlets. I was with Food Network for years, and I had shows on Food Network that I was on, and I was very close with a huge group of those chefs, probably many of whom you're thinking about right now, and they no longer talk to me. When I came out in 2020 and it was clear that I was obviously more conservative, I got dropped from everything. Industry boards, all my speaking engagements, everything that was more focused in that kind of celebrity chef world. But I will tell you that there's probably 30 or 40% of them are hardcore closeted right-wingers, and they just keep their mouths shut and they go along with it and they play the game and they fake it, which quite frankly I find to be disingenuous and lacking of integrity. I wish everybody would come together and just speak their minds without being canceled or fear of cancellation. But it's a cult. I mean, it is a cult, and it is very much, we think cancel culture has gone away, but it hasn't, especially in a lot of the industries and the arts, or what they think that they own, right? Like, they think culinary arts is an art that the left should own, when in reality, I think that especially many libertarians and many more kind of free market thinkers and small government thinkers really do produce phenomenal art, food, all of that, but it gets ignored because we're not allowed to.
So you now have a different, with all the things you're doing, you've taken on another hat that you're wearing, and you recently were appointed to the Huntington Beach City Council. And you took the seat of my old boss from back then, my first boss in politics, now Senator once again, Tony Strickland. So what prompted your interest in serving on the council, and kind of what's the backstory? How did this all come together, and kind of how do you approach this new job? What do you hope to do?
Well, I've always looked at city council and local politics as being more important in many cases than national politics, and I followed it closely from the outside. I know everybody who's been running it, and I know everybody involved in city council and on the periphery. I've owned businesses in Huntington Beach for 15 years, been very involved in the city. So when Tony was leaving, I know they were looking for, originally I wasn't even considering it, but I know they were really looking for somebody who was going to be immune to the wrath. This is something I've been dealing with for 5 or 6 years. It means nothing to me. First of all, you can only be canceled once. You can only boycott once.
Right.
For some reason, especially those in Huntington Beach and the left, thinks that they can scare me with boycott threats. It's like, you've already boycotted me.
Right.
You can't keep doing it. And every time they try and do it, my business goes up. So I actually look forward to that opportunity, especially from a sales perspective. And I know the policy. I also looked at it as local politics really being an immersion and an MBA in politics in general, because really all you do is scale it out state and then federal and even in international policy programs. So I'm always hungry to learn and be involved in something. What I like to bring to council, it is a 7-0 city council, right? That is a good thing. So I know that I'm stepping into a situation where we can be efficient with our decisions, we can get things done. I also want to lay down the foundation for the city to be financially sustainable, as well as sustainable just generally speaking from a public safety perspective over the next 10 years. And that's decisions we make today. A lot of the stuff that gets talked about is kind of culture nonsense that, quite frankly, I think is just noise. But the real interesting things that we're doing in Huntington Beach as a city, I think are very, very valuable, and I wanted to get involved with that, especially with all the lawsuits against the state of various environmental concerns and ways in which we're up against the CARB, or the California Coastal Commission, especially in a coastal city. I was hungry to be involved.
So let's talk about your terrific book.
Yep.
The Family Cookbook, which really promotes cooking with your kids and your family. And I think it's a great idea. And, speaking as someone who doesn't have kids but loves to cook, there's a lot of great recipes in here that I can't wait to go try when I get back from FreedomFest and add to my weeknight menu. So how did you come up with the idea to write this book? And, when our listeners pick up a copy, what will they find? And speak to the importance. A lot of people talk about this, and I think it's a great, for our country and how kind of lost and divided we may seem at times. The idea of cooking at home with your loved ones and having that regular meal with your family, for growing strong family bonds and communities.
You need to be able to have the skill of cooking, food, culinary, all of that in life, period, hands down, no question about it. It's a survivalist skill. Also, I think spending time in the kitchen, especially with the family, is the most important thing in the world. We are too often on the fly, DoorDash, Uber Eats, takeout, Amazon, Instacart, all of that. We're just not spending time together, sitting down, taking a breath, having conversations anymore. That's important. The genesis of the book came about because my kids love Brave. Are you familiar with Brave Book?
Yes.
So
yeah.
Brave Books, which started 4 or 5 years ago, doing these real kind of more not religious based, but they just books with morals, kids books, to kind of the antidote to the woke nonsense. We started to get those for the kids, and they fell in love with them. So I had this natural fit to Brave Books. I've been asked to do cookbooks for years and years, and I've never wanted to do it. I think it's a saturated market. But with Brave, they came to me and said, look, we have this massive audience and these families that are really about bringing together the community and the family aspect. A cookbook seems like it would only make sense. And I also realized, especially amongst the kind of Maha explosion, there were a lot more people that were looking for simple, approachable ways in which they can get in the kitchen, what to eat. It's a seed oil-free book. It's healthy in the sense that it's not chemicals and preservatives. And if you follow just one recipe one day a week, or you get into the kitchen one more time, I think that can make a massive change in your life, your health, your diet, etc. Or if you're cooking with your family. So it's really not that intellectual at all. It's pretty simple and pretty to the point. And we just take fun recipes, dishes everybody knows, and then add our own little spin. And those who follow the recipes can pretend like they're a chef.
So everyone's ready for summer. Here in Palm Springs, where it's 110 today, we're more ready for summer, I think, than most. And they're looking for great ideas for things to make, at home, especially for a great family meal. So share with our listeners maybe an idea or two from your cookbook that even the novice cook at home, or the pickiest eater in the family, will enjoy for a fun summer dinner together.
Well, and I got to go through my mental Rolodex of the recipes, but I would say, just generally speaking, I think that I think the grill is a great tool because you don't have to clean it. You just give it a wipe down 1, 2, 3. And I think that generally cooking roast and braising meat is something that feels as if it's very complicated. So I always talk about doing like simple tacos and quesadillas and using meat really as a centerpiece, but taking some of these offcuts of meats and braising them and then finishing them on the grill. So whether it's a chuck roast or a shoulder roast, taking that, seasoning it up and slow roasting it until it's meltingly tender, and then finishing it on the grill. Finishing your whole meal on the grill, throwing some taco shells on there. We do fish tacos, which I think are great, or they're even the turkey chili, which you can kind of eat all week and works in the summertime. So, across all my platforms, also have a video platform. We have a cooking show that we launched online at AmericanGravy.com. It kind of intercepts with a lot of these, the recipes in this cookbook as well. But you can see the videos.
So finally, our last question we ask all our guests. We call our podcast Next Round because of PRI's proximity to wine country and our love of discussing public policy over a great glass of California wine. So what wine or beer or cocktail or other beverage are you enjoying this summer that you can recommend to our listeners to celebrate the publication of your terrific book?
I look for light cocktails. I'm a Campari fan. I like a little bit of that bitterness, especially before I eat. So even Campari with a dash of grapefruit as opposed to the traditional orange, like a spritzer, some club soda, for different fruits. I suggest playing with different fruits, even just that sparkling alcohol, whether it's sparkling club soda or sparkling water, whether it's an Aperol spritz or Aperol or Campari, but utilizing the exterior fruits, like zesting fruits into there to give it that lighter flavor. That's I'm a pretty easy guy when it comes to drinking and having a cocktail.
All right. So Andrew, this has been great. How can our listeners follow what you're doing and keep up to date with what you have going on?
Everything's really at www.americangravy.com. We've got our videos on there, all my social platforms, the cookbook, all of our new video content as well. So
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on Next Round.
Thanks for having me.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.